Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Hit the bell for new stories. In a distant future where humanity has spread across galaxies, the human race has made its mark in unexpected places. Aliens, once skeptical of humanity's ability to adapt and thrive in the cosmos, now look at Earthlings with a mixture of awe and curiosity. The story begins in a bustling space station orbiting a distant planet in the Tau Ceti system. As humans mingle with various alien species in the crowded market districts, a certain corner of the station attracts both human and alien visitors. The Human Experience Area, a novelty attraction that showcases Earth customs. The Star attraction is a peculiar exhibit in the form of a human bathroom stall, set up to simulate Earth's bathroom culture. For most, it's simply a novelty to observe human habits. For others, it's an opportunity to learn something far more intimate. Today, a mysterious alien woman, a stunningly beautiful being with soft, silver skin and iridescent eyes, steps into the Human Experience Area. Her name is Zara, and she's a diplomat from a distant, technologically advanced alien species, known for their intense curiosity and fascination with human culture. Zara has seen many human customs before, but something about the rumors surrounding Earth's bathroom stalls intrigues her deeply. The bathroom stall in question is simple enough by human standards: 2 walls, a door, and a curious hole in one of the walls. The hole is the key element. On Earth, it's an oddity, something seen as a simple feature of privacy in certain cultures. However, to the aliens, the stall is an enigma, a challenge, a mystery to be unraveled. And Zara is drawn to it. As Zara steps into the stall, her breath catches in her chest as she takes in the unfamiliar surroundings. She can feel the strange pull of the hole, sensing that it holds some kind of deeper meaning or purpose. She stands in front of it, her shimmering fingers brushing the smooth edges of the opening. The stall is filled with the faint scent of Earth's air fresheners, the sound of distant chatter echoing in the background as alien tourists observe from the outside. Zara's eyes narrow with both confusion and fascination. She's not alone in this curiosity. A human, stationed to guide visitors, watches Zara's movements closely, intrigued by the alien's interest in something so mundane. Zara has come to the stall with a purpose: to understand how humans experience pleasure, something her species has struggled to grasp. They view pleasure as an abstract concept, something incomprehensible beyond basic needs like sustenance and reproduction. But this particular feature, the hole in the bathroom stall, is rumored to be something that brings humans both connection and release, and she intends to understand why. As she reaches closer to the hole, she hesitates for a moment, considering the strange urge to explore. She recalls the human guide's casual mention that the hole has a certain function. Her own body temperature seems to rise in response to the alien energy of curiosity mingling with a more visceral sensation she can't quite explain. She feels like she's been given a key to something ancient, a gateway into the sensual side of humanity she's never before encountered. The human guide, a young man named Jason, notices Zara's hesitation. He approaches slowly, his voice low as he speaks. "You don't have to do anything you're not comfortable with. Just a part of human nature. It's something that many have been curious about, but it's private. It's natural." Zara turns her head, her eyes locking with his. "Natural?" she repeats, the alien term twisting on her tongue. "Explain. What is the purpose?" Jason smiles softly, realizing that the alien doesn't quite understand. "It's complicated. But it's about intimacy. Something that's often hidden from outsiders. A way of connecting to human pleasure." Zara's eyes flicker with recognition as the meaning begins to dawn on her. Intimacy? Pleasure? In the midst of privacy? She muses aloud, intrigued. Jason nods. "Exactly. But not all humans use the hole, and many prefer other means of connection. It's a matter of choice, of human experience." He lets the words hang in the air for a moment, aware of how intimate the discussion has become. Zara, ever so determined to grasp the full picture of human behavior, tilts her head thoughtfully. "I wish to understand," she says, her voice quiet but firm. "Teach me." Jason feels a spark of both caution and intrigue. He had been briefed that the alien delegation was eager to study human experiences, but he hadn't imagined something like this would unfold so quickly. He looks at the alien woman before him, realizing the path they are about to walk is an unusual one, but one that will undoubtedly change both of their perspectives forever. As Zara turns back toward the hole, Jason steps closer, a new understanding forming between them. He takes a deep breath, realizing that this encounter could offer more than just insight into alien curiosity. It could bridge a gap between two vastly different species and deepen their mutual understanding. The scene is set for an unusual and intimate exploration of human nature, and Zara is prepared to go beyond what she thought she understood about humanity. As her fingers hover over the hole, she silently prepares herself for whatever comes next. It's not just about learning how humans experience pleasure, it's about learning what drives the human spirit, what makes them truly human. Zara stood silently, her eyes locked on the hole in the bathroom stall wall. It was an oddly simple thing, a feature of Earth's restroom design that she had been told could unlock the mysteries of human connection. Yet, for all its simplicity, the hole seemed to hum with a strange, almost magnetic allure, pulling at something deep inside her. Jason, the human guide, stood nearby, watching her intently. He had never expected to find himself in this position, explaining something as private as the human bathroom stall to an alien diplomat. Yet here they were, on the edge of something that neither of them fully understood. "You see," Jason said softly, breaking the silence, "humans use this space for more than just necessity. It's a way of expressing vulnerability. For some, it's about connection in ways that aren't possible in everyday life. A space where the walls fall away and people open up to something deeper within themselves." Zara turned her head slightly, her iridescent eyes focusing on him. "Connection," she repeated, her voice soft but filled with wonder. "But how does something so simple bring pleasure?" Jason felt the weight of her question and hesitated, unsure of how to explain something so fundamentally human. "It's not just about the physical aspect," he said after a moment. "It's about trust, intimacy, and the way we share ourselves with others. There's a kind of release in this space, a way to let go of the barriers we build around ourselves." Zara's gaze flickered back to the hole. She could feel the hum of curiosity growing stronger within her, the need to understand rising like a wave. Her species, despite their advanced technology and intellect, had never truly understood the concept of human pleasure, at least not in the way that humans experienced it. In her culture, physical pleasure was seen as a fleeting thing, something to be indulged in briefly but without much emotional depth. They had mastered everything from longevity to intellectual pursuits, yet they struggled with the simplest, most complex thing of all, connection. She took a step closer to the hole, her long, delicate fingers trembling slightly as they hovered near the smooth edge. Her mind raced with questions, but one rose above the others. How could something so simple lead to a profound human experience? Jason watched Zara, sensing the depth of her confusion and curiosity. He could tell she was grappling with something more than just an intellectual curiosity. There was something else, something deeper, in her attempt to understand the human experience. It was as though she had stumbled upon a piece of herself she hadn't known existed. "Humans often talk about the need for connection," he continued, his voice low but steady. "It's not just about touching or physicality. It's about being seen and accepted for who you are. The whole, it represents something different for each person, but it's a place where they can allow themselves to be vulnerable. And in that vulnerability they find something extraordinary. Something deeply human." Zara turned to face him fully, her eyes wide with a mix of disbelief and intrigue. "Vulnerability," she said slowly, tasting the word. "But why would a being seek pleasure in such a vulnerable state?" Jason was quiet for a moment, considering how best to answer. It was one of those questions that was difficult to put into words. The human experience was messy, complex, and often contradictory. But there was something beautiful in that contradiction, something that Zara might come to understand if she could let go of her own carefully constructed notions about intimacy. "Because," Jason said finally, "it's when we're most vulnerable that we're most truly ourselves. In that space there's no hiding, no barriers. And that's where the real connection happens. The pleasure comes from the release, the freedom to be completely open without fear." Zara's gaze softened, her eyes narrowing as she processed the meaning of his words. She had never considered vulnerability in this way. To her, her own people had always prized control, precision, and emotional restraint. Pleasure was something fleeting, easily ignored or dismissed, like a passing wind that could be stopped with willpower. But this was something entirely different. The air in the stall seemed to thicken, the silence between them stretching as Zara allowed herself to absorb the weight of Jason's explanation. She didn't fully understand it, not yet. But something inside her stirred, a feeling she couldn't place, a kind of anticipation, an unspoken understanding that this moment would change everything for her. Jason could see that Zara was struggling with a concept that was fundamentally foreign to her. The idea that a simple human act could embody so much meaning was difficult to grasp for someone like her, an alien whose species had evolved beyond the need for such intimate expressions. Yet, the curiosity in her eyes told him she was willing to try. She wanted to understand, to explore something so deeply human that it defied her species' logic. Zara took another tentative step closer to the hole. This time she didn't hesitate. She reached out, her fingers brushing the edge of the opening, feeling the smoothness of the surface beneath her touch. It was as if the hole was calling to her, drawing her in, offering an answer she didn't yet fully understand. For a moment she simply stood there, her hand hovering, her body caught between the unknown and the familiar. She could hear Jason's breath, steady but laden with something more, perhaps understanding, perhaps anticipation. There was an intimacy to this moment, an understanding between them that transcended species. Jason stepped closer, his voice barely a whisper. "It's okay," he said. "You don't have to do anything you're not ready for. But sometimes the simplest things can teach us the most about ourselves." Zara took a deep breath, her alien physiology reacting in ways she couldn't explain. She knew that this moment was significant, that it marked the beginning of something profound. For the first time she was confronting something truly human, something that could not be replicated by technology or intellect. It was raw, unfiltered, and real. Her fingers curled around the edge of the hole, and she felt a surge of something: curiosity, desire, understanding. The sensation was almost electric, like a connection forming between her and this strange, fleeting human experience. And in that instant, Zara realized something that she hadn't anticipated. The hole wasn't just about human pleasure. It was about the essence of being human, about vulnerability, connection, and the willingness to embrace something without fully understanding it. She closed her eyes for a moment, allowing herself to feel the sensation of the hole, of the space around her, of the silent presence of Jason. This, she thought, was what it meant to be truly human, to reach out, to experience, and to trust. Zara's fingers lingered on the hole for a moment longer, feeling the cool, smooth surface against her skin. It was as though the touch connected her to something ancient, something deeply ingrained in the human experience, yet so alien to her own kind. The silence between her and Jason stretched, each of them aware of the gravity of the moment, though for different reasons. For Zara, the act of touching the hole represented the first step into an understanding that transcended the boundaries of her species' logic. Her people had no need for such practices. Pleasure and vulnerability were things best avoided, controlled, or eliminated altogether. But here, in this small, artificial stall on a human station, the fabric of those beliefs began to unravel. Jason watched her closely, feeling an unfamiliar tension in the air. He could see the conflict in her eyes, the uncertainty of one who is confronted with something she has no context for. He had been told about how alien species often saw humans as emotionally erratic, driven by desires that seemed illogical and irrational. Yet, here Zara stood, seemingly on the cusp of a revelation, an alien so advanced in technology and intellect yet on the brink of grasping the most basic of human truths. "You're thinking too hard," Jason said, his voice breaking the heavy silence. "You don't have to understand everything all at once. Sometimes the answers come when we stop trying to make sense of them." Zara's gaze shifted toward him, her alien eyes locking onto his with a mixture of confusion and curiosity. "But you say this is natural for humans. Yet it makes no sense. Why would you, a species so young and flawed, place such value on something so inconsequential?" Her voice was quiet, almost uncertain, but there was no mistaking the intensity of her desire to comprehend. Jason let out a small sigh, stepping a bit closer to her. "Because, for humans, pleasure, connection, these things are everything. We live for them. They're the glue that holds us together. They're what make us human. And yes, that might seem strange to someone from a species that's evolved beyond it. But for us, they are a reflection of our humanity. We don't need to understand it to experience it." Zara turned away from him, focusing again on the hole in the wall. The contrast between her advanced, calculating mind and this messy, emotional experience seemed to weigh heavily on her. She had studied human behavior, yes, but this was something far more visceral than she had ever anticipated. The more she thought about it, the less it made sense. Yet, a part of her could feel it, the subtle pull, the hum of energy that was so distinctly human and yet so foreign to her. She hesitated again. Her mind told her that what Jason spoke of didn't belong in a society that revered order and reason, but her body responded differently. There was a flutter in her chest, a warmth that spread through her veins, the kind of warmth she hadn't experienced in years, perhaps never before. She looked at Jason again, but this time with a different expression. Not just curiosity but something deeper, a kind of yearning to connect, to break through the barrier of alien intellect and find some shared understanding. I want to know," she murmured, her voice quiet but sincere. "Not just intellectually. But truly, how does it feel? Jason looked at her for a long moment, his breath caught in his throat. He hadn't expected her to ask. He wasn't sure what to say, whether to explain it in terms of words, or if words could even capture what she was asking. But one thing was clear. Zara was no longer just a diplomat studying human culture. She was a participant now, a curious soul searching for something beyond the surface. It's not about knowing, Jason said finally, stepping closer and lowering his voice. It's about feeling. There are no words that can truly explain it. You just experience it. And once you do, you'll understand. Zara nodded, though it wasn't with the kind of understanding she had hoped for. She reached out again, her fingers brushing the edge of the hole, this time with a tentative, almost reverent touch. Her body tensed as the sensation of the smooth surface met her skin, her mind racing with the need to comprehend what she was about to allow herself to feel. Jason stood at the edge of the stall, his presence a comforting but potent reminder of the human experience she was about to engage in. He knew that her actions were more than just curiosity, they were an expression of trust. She was stepping into unknown territory, crossing a boundary she had never imagined crossing. She was choosing to open herself up to vulnerability. Zara's breath quickened as she leaned closer, her eyes closing as if bracing herself. There was a moment of stillness, as if the universe itself had paused, holding its breath in anticipation. Then Zara stepped forward, the subtle pressure of her body against the stall's wall seeming to heighten the energy around her. She reached forward, her hand moving from the hole to the other side of the stall, where a slight indentation in the wall lay hidden. It was part of the experience, a design element that allowed for subtle shifts in sensation. She could feel a subtle change, a shift in her own state of mind, the complexity of her thoughts momentarily quieting. There was no immediate rush of sensation. No overwhelming pleasure, no sudden clarity. But there was something else, a slow, dawning realization that this wasn't just an experiment in human behavior. It was an emotional connection, one that bypassed the need for language or intellectualization. Zara had stepped into a space that humans occupied all the time, a space where vulnerability was not feared but embraced. The feeling that surged through her was unlike anything she had expected. It wasn't physical, not in the way her species understood it. It was deeper than that, something more. There was a warmth spreading through her chest, a sense of openness, of letting go. She felt as though she was no longer alone, but part of something greater. The hum of energy she had felt earlier now seemed to grow louder, filling her senses with a sense of belonging. Jason watched, his heart pounding in his chest as he saw the shift in Zara. It wasn't just the physical experience he had guided her toward, it was the emotional transformation. He could see it in her face, a look of wonder mixed with something deeper, something human. For the first time, Zara understood what Jason had meant by feeling. She had crossed into a space that had nothing to do with logic, control, or intellect. It had everything to do with connection, the kind of connection that humans, flawed and messy as they were, craved in their very being. And as she stood there, bathed in the subtle sensations that began to awaken within her, she realized that she wasn't just understanding the human experience, she was beginning to live it. Jason stood back, giving her the space she needed. He had always known that human experiences couldn't be explained away with logic or reason, but seeing Zara, this powerful alien diplomat, begin to grasp it for herself felt like witnessing something extraordinary, a bridge between their species forged in the most intimate of ways. Zara took a deep breath, her fingers trembling slightly as she pulled away. She looked at Jason, her eyes wide, the soft glow of understanding beginning to shine in them. I think I understand now, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Not fully. But I am beginning to feel it. Jason smiled softly, knowing that this was just the beginning. But for Zara, it was a revelation that would change everything. Zara took a step back, her hand trembling as she pulled it from the hole. The air in the stall felt heavy, almost charged with a strange energy. Her chest rose and fell in shallow breaths, the warmth she felt spreading through her body, not quite physical, yet undeniably real. She had expected to feel something else, something more tangible. Instead, she felt a flood of emotions: curiosity, wonder, connection, and perhaps most shockingly of all, peace. For the first time in her life, Zara wasn't analyzing. She wasn't searching for logic, calculating outcomes, or weighing probabilities. She simply was. The sensation of letting go, of allowing herself to experience something as raw and unfiltered as human vulnerability, was both terrifying and exhilarating. Jason stood quietly, giving her the time she needed to process. He could see the shift in her, Her posture had relaxed, her usually composed demeanor now soft and reflective. This wasn't about the hole in the stall anymore. It was about something much deeper, a journey that Zara was beginning and one that Jason could only watch unfold. I don't understand, Zara said at last, her voice barely audible. Her tone wasn't one of confusion but rather awe, an awe that slowly started to turn into something else, something more profound. She turned toward Jason, her eyes meeting his with an intensity he hadn't seen before. How is this possible? How does something so simple, so instinctual, carry such power? Jason smiled, his own sense of awe mirrored in her eyes. That's the thing, he replied, his voice gentle but firm. It's not about making sense of it. It's about feeling it. Humans don't always need to explain what's happening in the body or mind. Sometimes all we need is the experience. Zara's mind raced, her thoughts a swirl of contradictions. She was a being of reason, someone who had spent centuries studying cultures, galaxies, and philosophies that spanned the far reaches of space. She understood the intricacies of alien biology, the evolution of species, the most complex systems of technology. Yet, in this moment, standing in a human bathroom stall with a simple hole in the wall, she felt overwhelmed and unexpectedly grateful. You speak of feeling, she said, stepping closer to Jason. Her gaze remained fixed on the human, but now it carried a weight that hadn't been there before. But this isn't like anything I've ever experienced. It's not something I can control, not something I can study and analyze. It's uncontrollable. And that scares me. Jason's heart softened as he listened to her. Zara, despite her immense intellect and power, was still grappling with the rawness of human emotions, something that wasn't just a data point or an equation to solve. It was a complex, multi-layered experience, one that he knew would take time for her to fully grasp. Not everything needs to be controlled, Zara, he said, stepping closer, his voice soothing. Sometimes, the beauty of being human is in our inability to control it all. We find joy in the chaos, in the unpredictability. That's what makes us, us. Zara's eyes softened, the tension she had been holding in her shoulders easing just a fraction. She was beginning to understand what Jason was trying to convey. She had lived so long in a culture that thrived on control and perfection, where emotions were calculated and carefully contained. The thought of surrendering to something as intangible and unpredictable as human pleasure, or even the idea of feeling it, was deeply foreign to her. Yet, here she stood, standing on the precipice of an awakening. I have never been afraid of knowledge, Zara murmured, her voice contemplative. But this is something I don't think knowledge can prepare me for. This isn't something that can be dissected, explained, or even fully understood. It simply is. Jason nodded, his gaze steady. Exactly. And sometimes that's enough. Zara turned away from him, focusing once more on the hole in the stall. Her fingers hovered over it again, but this time she didn't touch it immediately. Instead, she closed her eyes, letting the memories of the sensation wash over her. The warmth, the connection, the peace. Her body felt different now, lighter, freer. It was as if a veil had been lifted, and for the first time she could see herself for who she was, a being capable of feeling deeply beyond the confines of her species' rigid doctrines. The fear she had initially felt had begun to fade, replaced by a new kind of curiosity, one that was no longer driven by intellect but by something far more primal. Jason, observing the shift in her demeanor, took a step back to give her space. He knew that Zara had crossed a threshold. She was no longer just an alien visitor exploring human customs. She was beginning to feel like a human. There was no going back from this, not now. He wondered if she even realized how deeply this experience was altering her, or if she had already accepted that something about her had changed forever. Zara turned toward him then, her eyes wide and filled with an emotion he couldn't quite name. I feel different, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know what it is, but it's as if I've unlocked a part of myself that was always there, just waiting for me to discover it. Jason smiled softly, stepping toward her once more. That's the human experience, he said gently. You've just had a taste of what it means to be truly alive. Zara nodded slowly, her gaze dropping to the floor, lost in her thoughts. She had always prided herself on her intellect, on the ability to control her emotions and her body. Yet, in this simple human act, she had found something more profound than all the technology and knowledge she had ever sought. She had found a piece of herself that she had never known existed. And it had all come from feeling. For a long while, the two of them stood in silence, a quiet understanding passing between them. Zara was no longer the cold, calculating diplomat who had entered this station, seeking knowledge. She was something more, a being who had discovered that some of life's most profound truths couldn't be grasped by intellect alone. "I want to know more," Zara said suddenly, her voice filled with resolve. Her eyes met Jason's again, and there was something different in them now. She wasn't just curious anymore. She wasn't just a student of human behavior. She had become a participant, ready to explore everything that humanity had to offer, both in its messiness and its beauty. Jason's heart swelled as he met her gaze, a silent promise passing between them. He didn't need to say a word. He knew that Zara's journey was just beginning. "I'll be here," he said simply. "Whenever you're ready." Zara nodded once more, her heart racing in her chest as she turned back to the stall. She was ready to explore this new side of herself, to embrace the vulnerability, the connection, and the joy that came with simply being. She didn't know where this journey would take her, but one thing was certain: she would never look at human pleasure, or the human experience, in the same way again. Zara stood in the quiet of the bathroom stall, the hum of the station's artificial lights the only sound accompanying her thoughts. Her mind raced with what she had just experienced, but it was a different kind of racing now. It was no longer the frantic pace of analysis, nor the calculating speed of her species' intellectual pursuits. It was slower, more deliberate, a reflection of the new awareness dawning within her. Human emotions, pleasure, vulnerability, connection. These weren't concepts she could simply catalog or reduce to scientific measurements. No, this was something far more intricate and personal. And though she didn't understand all of it yet, she was beginning to grasp that some things weren't meant to be understood. They were meant to be felt, embraced, and experienced. She turned toward Jason, who had remained by the doorway, watching her with quiet patience. His presence, calm and reassuring, felt like an anchor in the shifting sea of her thoughts. It was in his gaze, warm, steady, that Zara saw something she had never fully acknowledged before: humanity's innate desire to connect, to share, to be vulnerable with one another. It was as though Jason was offering her not just knowledge, but a kind of emotional bridge, one that could carry her across the chasm of her own limitations. "I think I need more," she said softly, her voice still laced with a hint of wonder. The words felt strange to her lips, but they were the truth. There was a craving in her chest, a need to explore this new frontier of feeling that had been unlocked in her. It wasn't just curiosity anymore, it was something deeper, more visceral. Jason raised an eyebrow, a gentle smile tugging at his lips. "More?" he asked, his voice warm with understanding. "Yes," Zara responded without hesitation. "More of this connection. More feeling. I never realized how much I was missing. It's overwhelming, Jason. But in a way, I feel more alive than I ever have." Jason stepped forward, his expression softening. "Zara, I think you're just beginning to understand what it means to truly live. For humans, it's not about control or perfection. It's about embracing the chaos, the unpredictability, the vulnerability. And the beauty is, the more you let go, the more you'll experience. But it takes time. There's no rush." Zara nodded slowly, her eyes distant as she absorbed his words. The desire to understand had always been a core part of her identity. As an ambassador, she had spent her life studying alien cultures, analyzing their values, their behaviors, their biology. Had all been about knowledge and control. But now, standing in front of Jason in a small bathroom stall on a human station, she was realizing that some of the most profound aspects of existence couldn't be captured in a textbook or data stream. As she continued to reflect on what Jason had said, a feeling of gratitude washed over her. For all the vastness of the universe, for all the knowledge she had accumulated, it was this simple human experience, raw and unrefined, that was teaching her the most. It wasn't an experience she could quantify or explain. It was an experience that required her to feel, to be present, to relinquish the need for answers and simply exist. Jason watched her closely, sensing the transformation taking place within her. He knew this wasn't something he could explain with words anymore. Zara had crossed a threshold, a point where intellectualization could no longer provide the answers she sought. The only way forward was through her own willingness to feel, to let go of the tightly wound control she had always held onto. "I can't go back to the way I was," Zara said suddenly, her voice almost a whisper. "After this, I can't go back. I don't want to." Jason's heart clenched. It was a confession, one laced with vulnerability, and Zara had never been one to admit her own uncertainties. The quiet realization that her old ways, the intellectual armor she had worn so long, no longer fit her felt like a kind of rebirth. She had taken the first step into a world she had never known, a world that was messy, imperfect, and full of raw emotion. "I wouldn't expect you to," Jason replied, his voice steady and sincere. This is just the beginning, Zara. There's so much more to explore, so much more to feel. The human experience is vast, and there's no way to understand it all in one go. But that's part of the journey. Zara looked up at him, her eyes wide with something unspoken. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know what comes next. But I want to explore this. I want to experience more of this, humanity. Jason smiled gently, his eyes full of warmth. I think that's a journey you won't regret. The words hung between them, charged with possibility. Jason could see that Zara was no longer the detached alien diplomat, the representative of a race that saw itself as beyond such things as emotion and vulnerability. She was becoming something new, something more human. And the thought filled him with a quiet sense of pride, not just in her growth, but in the simple yet profound bond they had shared over the last few hours. Zara took a deep breath, her chest rising and falling as she gathered her thoughts. The uncertainty that had once plagued her was beginning to ease, replaced by something more solid. A desire to discover, to feel, and perhaps, to connect on a level she had never before thought possible. Where do we go from here? She asked, the question carrying both the weight of the unknown and a sense of eager anticipation. Jason tilted his head slightly as though considering her words. He could see how much she had changed in such a short time. The walls she had built around herself, the barriers that had once made her so impenetrable, were crumbling before him. It was a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, to the way humans were capable of growth, of change, and of embracing even the most uncomfortable parts of themselves. I think, Jason said, his voice low and confident, we start by continuing what we've begun. We take it slow. We explore together and we learn from each other. And most importantly, we feel it. All of it. Zara nodded, her lips curling into a small but genuine smile. I'm ready, she said, her voice resolute as if this was a declaration of intent. The words felt final, like a decision she had made not just intellectually, but with her whole being. Jason reached out and gently placed a hand on her shoulder. It was a simple gesture, but one that spoke volumes about the trust and connection they were building. You're not alone in this, Zara, he said. I'll be here. As long as you need me. Zara looked at him, the warmth in her chest growing. For a moment, everything else seemed to fade away, her doubts, her fears, even the complexities of her mission. All that remained was this moment, and the profound sense that, for the first time in her life, she was exactly where she was meant to be. As the two of them stood there, silently acknowledging the bond they had forged, Zara realized something else. This wasn't just a personal journey. It was one that transcended her own transformation. It was a bridge between two species, one that had always seemed so distant, yet now felt within reach. And she was ready to cross it step by step with Jason by her side. Zara had always prided herself on being in control. As an emissary from a species known for its intellect and structure, she had been taught that control was essential for survival. Her every move, every thought, was meticulously calculated, as was the behavior of every alien race she studied. Emotions had never been her priority, they were distractions, weaknesses to be analyzed, perhaps even studied, but never embraced. Yet here she stood in the small, dimly lit human station bathroom, grappling with a tidal wave of sensations that could not be contained by intellect alone. The world of raw human emotion was a vast, unpredictable ocean, and she was only just learning how to swim. Jason had been patient with her, guiding her without expectation. His words, his touch, simple but full of meaning, had grounded her in a way she hadn't known was possible. He had offered her something far beyond knowledge, understanding, support, and a connection that transcended species. She had begun to see him not just as a human, not just as a companion, but as a partner in her exploration of herself. They had shared moments of silence, moments of quiet understanding, as Zara processed the changes she was going through. But now, as they stood facing each other, an unspoken question lingered between them. What came next? Zara broke the silence first. Jason, I need to know more. Her voice was steady now, not wavering as it had been before. There was a sense of clarity in her tone, a resolve that hadn't existed before. Not just about human connection, but about us. About how we can exist together in this way. Jason smiled softly, his heart swelling with affection for her. She had come a long way from the distant, stoic diplomat to someone who was now seeking more than just intellectual understanding. It was a profound shift, one that spoke volumes about her willingness to open herself up to something new, something beautiful. I think, Jason said, his voice calm and reassuring, that's something we can only explore together. And we'll take it one step at a time, Zara. But the fact that you're asking means you're already farther along than you realize. Zara nodded slowly, her thoughts racing. The human experience, so different from the logic-driven existence of her people, had begun to unlock parts of herself she hadn't known existed. There was something intoxicating about it, something raw and vulnerable, yet deeply grounding. She no longer feared it, in fact she welcomed it. And yet, there was a lingering doubt, a fear that her own nature, her own cultural conditioning, would hold her back. Her people valued intellect and control, but could they ever truly understand the beauty of human connection? Could she, despite the vast differences between their species, ever truly bridge the gap between them? Jason must have sensed her hesitation. He took a small step forward, his presence soothing but not intrusive. Zara, you're not alone in this. You don't have to have all the answers right away. And neither do I. We learn as we go. And we trust each other. The simplicity of his words resonated deeply with Zara. Trust. That was the key. It wasn't something she could calculate or strategize. It was something that had to be earned, something that could only grow over time, through shared experiences, shared moments of vulnerability. For the first time, Zara realized that she was no longer just a curious observer of humanity, she was an active participant in its mysteries. She had let go of the need to control, to analyze everything, and had begun to embrace the beauty of the unknown. It was terrifying, but it was also freeing. In this moment, she wasn't just an emissary. She was a person with the capacity to feel, to connect, to explore. I trust you, Jason, she said, her voice quieter now but filled with sincerity. I'm ready to take that next step with you. Jason met her gaze, and for a moment, there was nothing but the unspoken bond between them, an understanding that transcended words. They didn't need to explain themselves any further. Zara had given herself fully to the experience, and Jason had been there every step of the way, not pushing her, but offering his presence as a foundation for her growth. We'll take it slow, Jason said, the weight of the moment settling between them. But I'm here every step of the way. Zara nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew the path ahead wouldn't be easy. She knew there would be moments of doubt, moments when the urge to retreat into old habits would be overwhelming. But something had shifted within her, something irrevocable. The walls she had spent centuries building were now crumbling, piece by piece. And in their place, something new was taking shape, a connection that was not just intellectual but emotional, physical, and spiritual. The journey would be long. She knew that now. But it was one she was ready to take. The soft hum of the station's air filtration system filled the silence, a grounding background noise to the emotional intensity of the moment. Jason stepped closer, his presence warm and comforting. He reached out, his hand brushing lightly against hers, a simple gesture, but one that held more weight than any words could convey. Zara's breath caught in her throat at the contact. It wasn't the touch itself that startled her, it was the meaning behind it. It was the understanding that Jason was offering her not just physical proximity, but his trust, his willingness to walk alongside her in this journey of exploration. Without thinking, she squeezed his hand gently, a silent acknowledgement of everything she had come to realize in this short, but transformative time. There was no need for words now. They both understood. I don't know what comes next, Zara said, her voice a whisper, almost as if speaking her uncertainty aloud might make it real. But I know I want to find out. With you? Jason's smile deepened, his eyes softening with emotion. We'll figure it out together. One step at a time. For a long moment they simply stood there, the quiet bond between them growing stronger. Zara's mind was still filled with a mixture of awe and uncertainty, but now there was a sense of peace as well. She had taken the first step, and Jason had been there with her every step of the way. In this small, intimate moment, she realized that it wasn't just about the human experience. It was about shared experience, about learning, growing, and exploring together. The path ahead was uncertain. But for the first time, Zara wasn't afraid of the unknown. She was ready to embrace it, to allow herself to be vulnerable, to take the next step into the uncharted waters of human connection. And Jason would be right there beside her, every step of the way. Zara awoke the following morning with the sensation that the universe around her had shifted. The walls of the station, the soft hum of its systems, even the familiar flicker of the station's artificial gravity, none of it felt quite the same. It was as though everything had been imbued with a new meaning, a new layer of depth. She was different. And she wasn't sure how she felt about that just yet. But one thing was clear. The transformation she had undergone since meeting Jason had not been a fleeting experience. It wasn't just the novelty of human connection that had made her feel like someone new. It was the genuine desire to continue exploring, to continue feeling. The vulnerability she had once feared had become the very things that made her feel alive, and now she wanted more. As she stood in front of the small mirror in her quarters, her reflection stared back at her, her alien features still as unmistakably Zara as ever, but the eyes looking back at her were no longer the same. They were filled with an openness, an understanding, and most of all, an uncertainty. A beautiful uncertainty. A part of her still wanted to retreat, to fall back into the intellectual security of her former self, where everything was predictable and controlled. But now, when she thought about that path, it felt suffocating. Instead, she yearned for the unpredictability, the rush of the unknown, the rawness of the human experiences Jason had introduced her to. Her thoughts turned to him, Jason, the human who had unknowingly led her on this journey. The past few days had been a revelation. Every touch, every shared glance, every conversation had peeled away layers of her former self, revealing a side of her she hadn't known existed. It was terrifying. It was exhilarating. And it was only just beginning. Jason was already at the station's communal lounge when Zara arrived, sitting at a corner table with a cup of something that smelled remarkably like human coffee. It wasn't exactly an aroma she had appreciated at first, but now, it felt like the comfort of something familiar, something grounding, something human. She took a seat across from him, her eyes locking onto his with a mix of curiosity and something deeper, something unspoken. "Good morning, Zara," Jason greeted her, his voice warm, but there was a softness there now, an understanding that hadn't been present before. It was the same feeling she had sensed yesterday, but now it was more pronounced. It was the quiet recognition of two souls who were learning to coexist and grow together. Zara nodded, offering him a small smile in return. "Morning, Jason. I've been thinking." He leaned back in his chair, looking at her with an expression that was half amused, half curious. "About what?" About what comes next for us," she said slowly, as though testing the weight of the words in the air between them. "I know I can't just remain as I was. I've learned so much in the last few days. But I also realize that I don't fully understand this connection between us. Not yet." Jason set his coffee down and leaned forward slightly, his gaze intent. "You don't need to have everything figured out, Zara. I certainly don't. But that's the beauty of it. We're in this together, figuring things out as we go." Zara studied him, her heart a little lighter. It was a relief to hear that. For a moment, she had feared that the vulnerability she had shown might be seen as a weakness, or worse, that Jason might want her to revert to the intellectual stoicism she had once known. But he wasn't asking for that. He was asking her to be present, to keep exploring, to keep feeling. Her mind swirled with thoughts, but for once they didn't feel like burdens. They didn't feel like calculations to solve. They felt like possibilities. "I want to learn more," Zara confessed. "About us. About how we can build something meaningful. But it's hard for me, Jason. My people, they value intellect, logic. We're not trained to think about these things. Emotions, vulnerabilities, they're almost considered inefficiencies." Jason's expression softened, his understanding clear. "I know. But I think that's what makes human connection so powerful. We're messy. We don't always know what we're doing. But when we choose to connect with someone, when we choose to be vulnerable with them, it creates something beautiful, something stronger than logic." Zara took a deep breath, processing his words. There was something about them that resonated deeply within her. As if all the fragmented parts of herself, the alien diplomat, the observer, the learner, the uncertain partner, were starting to come together. Slowly. Imperfectly. But together. "And you're right," Jason continued. "We don't need to have it all figured out right now. The journey itself, the discovery, the connection, that's what matters. We're not in a race, Zara. We're in this for the long haul." Zara nodded slowly, a smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "I can't promise I'll always understand this, Jason. I can't promise I won't struggle with it. But I want to try. I want to experience it fully. With you." The words felt heavier now, more solid. They weren't just something she was saying, they were a commitment, an acknowledgement of the unknown future that awaited them. Jason reached across the table, his hand brushing lightly against hers. The contact was simple, but it was enough. Zara's heart gave a small, almost imperceptible flutter. It wasn't just the touch itself, it was what the touch represented. Trust, mutual respect, and the willingness to explore the depths of each other's experiences. "I'm here, Zara. I'm here as long as you need me," Jason said softly. Zara squeezed his hand gently, and for the first time, the words didn't feel empty. They felt true. As long as they both were willing to face the uncertainties of their connection, as long as they were willing to continue exploring and growing together, they would be okay. It wasn't perfect. There would be struggles, challenges, and moments of doubt. But Zara now understood that imperfection was not something to be feared. It was part of the journey, part of what made the experience of being human so unique, so beautiful. As the two of them sat in silence, Zara felt a deep sense of peace. They were on the precipice of something extraordinary, something that transcended species and boundaries. It was more than just a shared experience, it was the creation of something new, something built on trust, vulnerability, and the willingness to embrace the unknown. The journey had only just begun, and Zara was no longer afraid. With Jason by her side, she was ready to face whatever came next. The end. Thanks for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more exciting HFY stories. Your support means the world to us. And make sure to tap the bell icon so you never miss an update. Stay tuned for our next adventure, and until then, keep exploring the stars. See you in the next video.